The most dangerous man in 3 Galaxies wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a kitchen knife. The blade moved in steady rhythm against the cutting board. Soft, precise, almost peaceful. Each slice landing exactly A4 in a part, like something measured long before this moment. Steam curled upward from a simmering pot, carrying the scent of herbs and slow-cooked protein through the metal corridors of the flagship. And Ethan Cole didn't look like someone anyone would fear. Not in a plain gay cook's uniform. Not with his sleeves rolled up and his posture slightly tired, like a man who just wanted his shift to end. But there was something in the silence around him, something that didn't belong in a place built for war, because even the hum of the ship's engines seemed to lower when he worked, like the steel itself remembered something it shouldn't. And then the alarms hit, sharp, layered, urgent red light flooding the galley in pulsing waves as the overhead system crackled to life. Multiple unidentified fleets exiting warp at close range, 3 distinct signatures, 3 different galactic regions converging at the exact same coordinates. And for a moment, every crew member froze. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every motion stalled except Ethan's because he didn't flinch. Didn't reach for anything, didn't even look up. The knife paused for half a second in his hand before continuing its path. Clean, controlled, deliberate, like nothing outside that room mattered. And that was when General Kalira Voss stepped into the doorway, her presence filling the space before she spoke. Cobalt skin catching the red emergency lights, golden eyes narrowing as she took in the scene, the crew scrambling behind her. Officers shouting into comms, the distant vibration of shields powering up, but her focus locked onto one thing. One person, the cook, who wasn't reacting, who wasn't afraid, who wasn't even curious. All fleets are requesting immediate communication. An officer reported behind her, voice tight. They're broadcasting one demand across all channels. Kira didn't turn, didn't blink, say it. The officer hesitated like the words themselves carried weight. They're asking for a human designation, Ethan Cole, and for the first time, the knife stopped. Not dramatically, not sharply, just still suspended above the board. And in that quiet pause, something shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like gravity adjusting by a fraction. Ethan exhaled slowly, setting the blade down with care, wiping his hands on a clean cloth like he had all the time in the universe. And when he finally looked up, his eyes didn't carry fear or anger or even surprise, just a kind of tired understanding, like he'd been expecting this longer than anyone else. Kira took a step closer, boots echoing once against the metal floor. "You're going to explain why 3 Galaxies just showed up for my cook." Her voice was controlled, but there was a crack beneath it, a question she wasn't ready to ask out loud. Ethan met her gaze for a brief second, then looked past her toward the sealed bulkhead, toward the fleets waiting in silence. And when he spoke, it was quiet, almost gentle, because if I don't walk out there, he paused, not for effect, but because the words seemed heavier than they should be, they won't leave. And somewhere beyond the hall, 3 entire armadas held position, not advancing, not firing, just waiting for a man who had been standing in a kitchen this whole time. The galley felt smaller after he spoke, like the walls had moved an inch closer without anyone noticing, and General Kalira Voss did not like that feeling. She was used to commanding fleets, to reading battlefields in seconds, to knowing exactly where every threat stood. But this was different. This was a quiet man in a kitchen who had just made 3 Galaxies wait, and nothing in her training explained that. "You expect me to believe they came all this way for you?" she said, her voice steady, but lower now, controlled, the kind of tone she used when something did not add up. Ethan did not answer right away. He turned back to the counter, not to ignore her, but to finish what he started, sliding the last cut pieces into the pot with the same care as before. Like routine mattered, like normal still existed if he chose to keep it. The steam rose again, soft and familiar, and for a second the alarms felt distant, like they belonged to another ship, another life. "I was hoping they would not find me here," he said, finally. Simple. No drama, no excuse, just a fact placed gently into the air. Kira stepped closer, her boots quiet this time, her eyes studying every movement, every breath. "No one hides from 3 Galaxies," she replied. And that was not a challenge. It was a statement of reality. Ethan gave a faint nod like he agreed, like he had always known that outcome. "I did not hide," he said, reaching for a ladle, stirring once. Slow, deliberate. I stopped. The word lingered, heavier than it should have been. Kira narrowed her eyes. "Stopped what?" And this time there was no command in her voice, only a question she could not ignore. Ethan set the ladle down, wiped his hands again, the same motion, the same calm. But when he looked at her now, there was something else behind his eyes. Not threat, not pride, just memory. "Being useful," he said, and that answer made even less sense. Because outside, fleets did not mobilize for someone useless. Outside, entire regions did not align for a cook. The comm channel crackled again, louder now, insistent. General Voss, they are requesting immediate response. They are holding position, but their energy output is rising. Kira did not look away from Ethan. Open a channel, she ordered, and the air shifted as the main display flickered to life on the far wall. 3 insignias appeared, each one from a different part of known space, each one powerful enough on its own to start a war. And yet they stood together now, unified by one purpose. A voice came through, layered, translated across multiple languages, but clear enough. General Kalira Voss, you are in possession of an individual designated Ethan Cole. Surrender him and we will withdraw. No threats, no aggression, just certainty like the outcome was already decided. Kira crossed her arms, her posture unyielding. You bring 3 fleets into my territory and expect compliance, she said, her tone sharp again. The general returning to the surface, the voice paused, then answered, we expect survival. And something in that response shifted the room again. Because it was not intimidation, it was caution, and Kira had heard that tone before. From soldiers who respected what they faced, from commanders who knew exactly what a single variable could do. She glanced back at Ethan just for a second, and he did not look at the screen, did not react to the fleets. He was watching the pot like timing mattered more than war. Like the smallest detail still deserved his full attention. You should let me go, he said quietly, not as a plea, not as fear, but as a suggestion. And for the first time since the alarms began, Kira felt something unfamiliar press against her certainty. Not doubt, but curiosity, sharp and dangerous. Because if 3 galaxies were afraid of one man, and that man chose to cook instead of fight, then the real question was not what he had done. It was what he was refusing to do now, and why they still believed he might. The silence after the transmission felt heavier than the alarms, like the ship itself was holding its breath, and General Kalira Voss did not move for a long second, her eyes still fixed on the display as the 3 insignias pulsed faintly in the dim red light. Waiting, patient, disciplined, not the posture of conquerors, but of something far more unsettling. Witnesses, she turned slowly, her gaze finding Ethan again, and this time she did not see a cook. Not really. She saw the space around him the way nothing seemed to press too close. Like even fear knew its distance. They are not here to fight me, she said more to herself than to him. Ethan gave a small nod, almost respectful. No, he said, his voice steady. They are here to make sure I do not. The words landed quietly. But they shifted everything, because war was something she understood. Escalation, deterrence, power. But this was containment. And that meant something had already happened long before this moment. Something that required 3 galaxies to agree on one thing, that one man should not be allowed to act again. Kira stepped closer until she was standing just a few feet from him. Close enough to see the fine details, the faint lines on his hands, the way his fingers rested near the counter but never tensed. The absence of fear was not confidence. It was something else. Something like restraint. What did you stop? She asked again. Softer now, not as a general, but as someone who needed the truth. Ethan looked at the pot, at the slow-rolling simmer, at the small controlled heat that he adjusted with a precise turn of a dial, and for a moment, it seemed like he might not answer, like the question belonged to a past he had already closed. But then he exhaled long and quiet. A war that did not know how to end, he said. And there was no pride in it, no weight of achievement, just a simple statement like describing weather that had passed. Kalira frowned slightly. Wars end when one side wins, she said, because that was the rule she had lived by, the structure that held order together. Ethan shook his head once, small, almost apologetic. That one did not, he replied. It kept going because both sides could not afford to lose, so they kept finding ways to continue. His eyes lifted briefly, meeting hers, so I removed the reason they could. Kira felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, not yet, but the shape of it forming. Because removing a reason for war did not sound like a battlefield tactic. It sounded like something deeper, something final without being spoken. The comm channel flickered again, the same voice returning. Still calm, still controlled. General Voss, our patience is not unlimited. Kalira did not look away from Ethan. You speak as if you are afraid of one man, she said, testing the idea out loud. The voice paused again, then answered with the same measured tone. We are not afraid of him. A brief silence followed. Then the truth settled as in. We are afraid of what happens if he stops choosing restraint. The words echoed through the galley, through the crew, through the metal walls, and for the first time, Kalira understood the scale of what stood in front of her. Not a weapon, not a threat, but a decision, a human one. And she realized then that every fleet outside was not here to fight. They were here to witness that decision, to make sure it held. Ethan reached forward and turned off the heat beneath the pot, the flame dimming to nothing, the simmer slowing, controlled, deliberate, and he spoke without looking up. "I am done cooking," he said quietly. And the sentence did not belong to the kitchen anymore. It belonged to everything waiting beyond the hall. The last trace of heat faded from the stove, and the quiet that followed did not feel like peace. It felt like a line being drawn, something invisible but absolute. And General Kalira Voss realized she was standing at the edge of a decision she had never been trained to make. Her entire life had been built on command, on structure, on the certainty that threats could be measured and answered. But Ethan Cole did not fit into any system she knew because he was not escalating, not resisting, not even defending himself. He was simply choosing, and somehow that choice carried more weight than any fleet outside the hall. "You think surrendering will solve this?" she said, her voice steady but lower now. Searching for something solid in a situation that refused to stay still, Ethan reached for a clean cloth, folding it with careful precision the same way he had handled everything since the alarms began. Controlled, deliberate, as if each motion mattered more than the chaos waiting beyond the walls. "It is not about solving it," he replied quietly. "It is about preventing what comes next." Kira studied him, trying to understand the shape of that statement. Because prevention was strategy, but this felt different. This felt personal, like a boundary he had drawn for himself long before anyone else knew his name. "And if I refuse?" she asked, not as a threat, but as a possibility she needed to examine. Ethan paused, not because he feared the question, but because he respected it, his eyes lifting to meet hers again. "Calm, steady. Then they will stay," he said, "and eventually someone will make a move they cannot take back." There was no urgency in his tone, no pressure, just a quiet certainty that made the outcome feel inevitable. Kira glanced toward the display. The three fleets still holding position, still silent, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. And that waiting felt heavier than any attack she had ever faced, because it meant restraint on a scale she had never witnessed. Entire civilizations choosing not to act simply because one man had not yet decided what he would do. The comm channel flickered again. A subtle shift in frequency. General Voss. The voice returned, still controlled, still measured. "We are detecting internal power fluctuations aboard your vessel." Kira frowned slightly. "Clarify." The response came without hesitation. "Your systems are adjusting to a variable we cannot predict." There was a brief pause. Then the truth settled in. "He is the variable." Kira felt the words land in a place deeper than logic because she had seen variables before. Unknowns, unpredictable elements in battle, but they were always external. Always something to be identified and neutralized, never something standing in front of her. Speaking calmly, choosing restraint as if it were the most natural thing in the universe, she turned back to Ethan, and for the first time, she did not see a mystery to solve. She saw a responsibility, something she had not asked for but could not ignore. "You said you stopped," she said slowly, "but they are still afraid." Ethan gave a faint, almost tired smile, not amused, not proud, just acknowledging a truth that had followed him across stars. "Stopping once does not erase what you are capable of," he said. And there was no bitterness in it, just acceptance. "It only proves you can choose not to do it again." Kalira held his gaze, feeling the weight of that choice settle between them, because this was not about fleets or power or territory anymore. This was about whether she believed in that choice, whether she trusted a man who had every reason not to be trusted. And outside, 3 galaxies waited. Not for war, not for victory, but for a single human decision to hold. Ethan stepped away from the counter, his movements unhurried. His posture relaxed like a man finishing his shift. But the space around him felt different now, charged with something unseen. "You should not have to make this call," he said quietly. "It was never meant to be yours," Kalira did. Not answer right away, because for the first time in her career, she was not thinking like a general. She was thinking like someone standing between what was and what could be. And she realized that if she let him walk out alone, she would never know if the universe had been saved or simply spared for a moment, and that uncertainty was something she could not accept. Not anymore. Kira's hand did not move to her weapon. It rested at her side, still controlled, but the tension in her fingers told a different story. Not fear, not hesitation, something sharper, something closer to decision. The kind that does not come from training, but from instinct. And that unsettled her more than the fleets outside ever could. "You are wrong," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship with a clarity that made even the distant alarms feel quieter. Ethan paused mid-step, not turning yet, but listening. Always listening. "It is my call now," she continued, taking one slow step forward, then another until she stood beside him instead of across from him. And that shift, that simple change in position, altered the space between them in a way neither of them ignored. He glanced at her just briefly enough to see the resolve settling into her posture, the kind that did not come from rank, but from choice. "If I let you walk out there alone," she said, her golden eyes steady, "then I am not commanding anything, I am just watching." The words carried weight, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. Ethan studied her for a moment longer this time, as if measuring something deeper than her words, something behind them, and for the first time since the alarms began, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. Not doubt, but recognition, like he had not expected this variable. "They are not here for you," he said, his tone calm but firmer now, a quiet warning woven into it. "They will not negotiate with you." Kalira gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth without stepping away from it. "Then they can learn," she replied, and there it was. Not arrogance, not defiance, but a simple statement of intent. The kind that had built empires and ended them. The calm channel activated again without request, the voice returning with less patience now, still controlled but tighter. "General Voss, your delay is creating instability across multiple regions. Surrender the individual immediately." Kaler turned toward the display, her posture straightening, the general fully present again, but different now, grounded in something beyond protocol. "You crossed into my space without invitation," she said, her voice carrying authority that filled the room. "You issued demands without context." Her gaze sharpened. "Now you will listen." There was a pause on the other end. Not silence, but recalibration. Because this was not the response they expected. "You are interfering with a containment protocol." The voice answered, more direct now. "You do not understand the scale of what you are protecting." Kira's expression did not change, but her next words landed with a precision that matched the man standing beside her. "Then explain it," she said. "Simple, controlled, undeniable." The room held still again. Even the crew behind her seemed to lean into the silence, waiting because this was no longer about compliance. This was about truth and the voice. After a long second shifted, not in tone, but in weight. "Ethan Cole is responsible for ending a conflict that spanned 3 galactic sectors," it said carefully, deliberately. He did so by removing every variable that allowed it to continue. Kalira did not look back at Ethan, but she felt the space beside her shift, not physically, but in presence. "And now you are afraid he will do it again," she said, finishing the thought without hesitation. The voice did not deny it. "We are ensuring he cannot." Kira let that settle for a moment, then spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate, "and if he chooses not to." There was a pause, longer now, heavier. "Choice is not a stable containment factor," the voice replied, and that was the answer, not tactical, not strategic, but philosophical. And Kira finally turned back to Ethan, really looking at him now. Not as a mystery, not as a threat, but as a person standing at the center of something larger than fleets and orders. "They do not trust your choice," she said quietly. And Ethan's response came just as quietly. "They have no reason to." There was no bitterness in it, no resentment, just a calm acceptance of how the universe saw him. Kalira exhaled slowly, the decision settling into place with a clarity that surprised even her. "Then I will," she said, and the words changed everything. Not because they were loud, not because they were dramatic, but because they were hers, chosen, owned, and for the first time since. The fleets arrived. Ethan did not look past her. He looked at her directly, fully, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not agreement, not understanding, but recognition. The kind that does not need explanation, because it is built on a single fragile truth, that sometimes the most powerful act in the universe is not force, not control, not even survival, but trust. The word trust did not echo loudly in the room, but it stayed, settling into the metal walls, into the quiet between breaths, into the space where decisions became irreversible. And Ethan did not look away from Kira this time. Not because he needed to convince her, but because he needed to understand her. "You do not know what you are choosing," he said softly. Not as a warning, not as a correction, but as a truth placed gently between them. Kalira held his gaze without hesitation, her posture steady, grounded. "I know enough," she replied, and there was no doubt in it. Only clarity, the kind that comes when uncertainty is no longer an excuse. The calm channel activated again, sharper now, the patience on the other end thinning. "General Voss, your declaration of protection has been noted." The voice said, its tone still controlled, but carrying a new edge. "Be advised, any interference with containment protocols will be interpreted as escalation." Kaya did not flinch, did not raise her voice. She simply answered. "Then you misunderstand my intent," she said. Each word measured precise. "I am not interfering." A brief pause followed long enough to shift attention across fleets, across systems, across whatever minds were listening. "I am redefining it." Silence answered her. This time, not absence, but processing. The kind that happens when expectations fail and new variables are introduced. Ethan exhaled quietly, almost inaudible, his eyes lowering for a moment, as if measuring something within himself. "You cannot protect me from what they are afraid of," he said. And there was no resistance in his voice, only acceptance. Kaya turned slightly toward him. Not fully, just enough to show she heard him. "I am not protecting you from them," she replied, her tone softer now, more personal. "I am protecting your choice from them." And that distinction changed the air again because it was no longer about a man or a threat or even a war. It was about the space around a decision, the fragile, invisible boundary that allowed it to exist. The voice returned slower now, more deliberate. "Clarify your position, General." Kira stepped forward closer to the display, her reflection faint against the shifting insignias of 3 galaxies. "Ethan Cole remains." "Under my authority," she said, her voice steady, unwavering, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, but as an individual under protection of this command. The response came after a longer pause this time, as if the weight of her words required more than immediate reaction. "You are assuming responsibility for an unstable variable," the voice said, and there was something new in it now. Not just caution, but recognition. Kira's answer did not hesitate. "No," she said quietly, "I am acknowledging that he is not a variable at all." Her gaze shifted slightly, not away from the display, but toward Ethan's reflection beside her own. "He is the constant." The silence that followed stretched wider than before, reaching beyond the ship, beyond the fleets, into the space where understanding either formed or fractured. Ethan's shoulders lowered just slightly. Not in relief, not in surrender, but in something closer to release, like a weight he had carried alone was no longer entirely his. "They will not accept that," he said. And for the first time, there was something beneath his calm, not fear, but concern. Not for himself, but for what her choice might cost. Kier's response came without. Looking at him, her focus still forward, still anchored. "They do not have to," she said, and there was a quiet strength in that, something that did not need agreement to exist. The calm channel flickered again, and when the voice returned, it was different. Not weaker, not louder, but changed like a line had been crossed, and something on the other side had shifted to meet it. "Then you leave us with one question." It said slower now, more direct. "General Voss, if he remains under your protection, what happens when he decides not to choose restraint?" The room stilled again. The crew silent, the systems humming, the fleets waiting, and Kira did not answer right away. Not because she did not have one, but because the answer mattered too much to rush. She turned her head just enough to meet Ethan's eyes again, not asking, not doubting, just seeing him fully. And when she spoke, it was not to the fleets, not entirely. It was to him as much as anyone listening. "Then I will stand there with him," she said, quiet, unwavering, "and make sure he never has to face that choice alone." The words did not leave the room. They expanded, settling into the silence between ships, between systems, between every listening mind that had come expecting control and found something else entirely. And for a moment, nothing responded. Not the fleets, not the comm channel, not even the low hum of the ship seemed as loud as it had been before, as if the universe itself needed a second to adjust to what had just been said. Ethan did not move right away. His eyes remained on Kira, not searching, not questioning, but absorbing like a man who had spent too long standing alone and was not certain how to stand beside someone else. "You should not do that," he said quietly, not rejecting her choice, but acknowledging its cost. Kira did not look away. "I already did," she replied, and there was no hesitation left in her voice now, only certainty, the kind that reshapes outcomes before they happen. The comm channel flickered again, but slower this time. Like, whatever. Intelligence stood behind those fleets, was recalculating something deeper than strategy. "General Voss," the voice returned, no longer sharp, no longer pressing, but measured in a different way. "Your position introduces a new variable into an already unstable system." Kira stepped closer to the display. Her posture aligned with command, but her presence grounded in something more personal. "Now then, adapt," she said simply. And the answer carried no aggression, only expectation, because adaptation was the foundation of every advanced civilization listening. The silence that followed was longer than before, stretching across seconds that felt like minutes. Because this was not a delay. It was consideration. Real, deliberate consideration, and that alone was enough to shift the balance of the moment. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly, not in relief, but in recognition of what was happening. Not outside, but here, inside this room, inside this choice. "They are not used to that," he said. His voice softer now, almost reflective. Kira tilted her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the statement. Neither am I, she answered. And that honesty carried more weight than any command she had given, because it was not built on certainty but on willingness. The display shifted again, the three insignias dimming slightly as the voice returned. Different now, not weaker, not stronger, but changed. Ethan Cole, it said directly this time. Not addressing the general, not filtering through protocol, but speaking to the man himself, Ethan did not step forward, did not adjust his stance. He simply listened. You have not denied the opportunity to act, the voice continued. You have only chosen not to. There was no accusation in it, only observation. That is correct, Ethan replied. Calm, steady. Then the question remains, the voice said. What ensures that choice continues? And this time, the silence that followed did not belong to Kira. It belonged to Ethan, because for the first time since the fleets arrived, the focus shifted entirely to him. Not as a target, not as a threat, but as a decision, and he did not answer immediately, not because he lacked one, but because the truth was not something he could offer lightly. His gaze lowered for a brief second, then lifted again, meeting the display, not challenging it, not avoiding it, just present. Nothing ensures it, he said quietly, and that answer did not weaken him. It defined him because it removed certainty from the equation, leaving only choice. That is why you are here, he added, and there was no bitterness in it, only clarity. The voice paused longer than before, and when it returned, there was something unmistakable in it now. Not fear, not control, but respect, fragile and unfamiliar. And if we leave, it asked, slower now, more deliberate than ever. What ensures you remain? Ethan did not look at Kalira right away, but the space between them shifted again. Something unspoken aligning. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried no force, no demand, only truth. I stay, he said, because someone finally chose to stand with me, not against me. And for the first time since the fleets appeared, the question was no longer about what he might do. It was about what he no longer needed to do. And that changed everything. The silence that followed his answer did not feel empty. It felt full, dense, with something that had not existed in this standoff before. Something no fleet formation could calculate, no protocol could contain. And for the first time since they arrived, the ships outside did not just wait. They hesitated, not in position, not in power, but in purpose, because the equation had changed in a way none of them had prepared for. And General Kalira Voss saw it clearly. Not on the display, not in the shifting energy readings, but in the space between words. In the way the voice did not respond immediately. In the way 3 Galaxies suddenly had to consider something they had avoided for too long. Trust not as a system, not as a safeguard, but as a risk. You are asking us to rely on a human decision. The voice said at last, slower than before, each word chosen carefully, as if the weight behind it mattered now. Ethan did not move. His posture relaxed, his hands empty. Nothing in his stance suggested control or power, and yet everything in the room seemed to orbit around him. No, he said quietly, I am not asking you for anything. His eyes lifted slightly. Not challenging, not defensive, simply present. I already made my choice, and that was the difference. Kira felt it settle in a place like a final piece of a structure she had not realized she was building, because this was no longer a negotiation. It was a declaration not of dominance, not of defiance, but of identity. The kind that does not change under pressure. The kind that remains even when the entire universe is watching. The comm channel flickered, but the response did not come right away. And that delay carried more meaning than any immediate answer could have, because it meant they were considering it. Truly considering it, not dismissing, not overriding, but evaluating something outside their control. Kira stepped forward slightly, her presence aligning with Ethan's without overt movement, not shielding him, not positioning herself as a barrier, but standing with him exactly as she had said she would. And that alignment, subtle as it was, sent a signal beyond the ship, beyond the fleets, something that could not be translated into data, but was understood all the same. General Voss, the voice returned, quieter now, not in volume, but in tone. You are placing your command at risk. Kira did not look away from the display, but her answer was not directed at it alone. Command is not maintained by eliminating risk, she said. Calm, grounded. It is maintained by choosing which risks matter, and that answer did not challenge them. It reframed the entire situation, because now the question was no longer whether Ethan was dangerous, but whether removing his choice created something far worse. The fleets held position, their energy signatures steady, their formations unchanged. But the tension that had filled the space between them began to shift. Not dissipating, but transforming, like pressure redistributing across a system that had been pushed too far in one direction. Ethan exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry something with it. Not relief, but release, as if the weight of being the only one making this choice had finally been shared, even if just slightly. "You have done enough," he said quietly to Kalira, his voice low, meant for her but not hidden from the room. "You do not have to carry this." Kira turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. Her expression steady, unyielding, but not cold. "Not anymore." "I am not carrying you," she replied just as quietly. "I am standing where you should not have been standing alone." And that distinction mattered because it removed the imbalance. It replaced protection with presence, authority with partnership, and outside across 3 galaxies. Something shifted, subtle but undeniable. The voice returned one final time, and now there was no edge, no pressure, only something quieter, something that had not been there before. "Ethan Cole," it said directly, clearly, "your choice has been observed." A pause followed, not for effect but for meaning, and acknowledged. The insignias on the display dimmed slightly, not disappearing, but withdrawing, their presence no longer pressing, no longer demanding. "We will maintain distance," the voice continued. "We will continue to observe," and that was not a threat, not a warning. It was a concession, the closest thing to trust they could offer. Given what they knew, given what they feared, Kira remained still, her posture unchanged, but something inside her settled. Not victory, not resolution, but alignment. Because this was not an end, it was a shift, a fragile one, built on a single decision that could not be enforced, only respected. And as the display faded to standby, as the fleets held their distance, as the alarms softened into background systems once more, Ethan finally looked away from the void outside and back toward the galley, toward the quiet space where everything had begun. His voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough to carry. "Then I will keep choosing," he said. And for the first time, it did not sound like a burden. It sounded like something closer to hope. The ship did not celebrate. There was no sound of victory, no shift in posture from the crew that marked the moment as anything more than what it was. Quiet, deliberate, unfinished. And that was what made it real, because nothing had been won, only held. And General Kalira Voss stood there for a long second after the channel went silent, her eyes still on the darkened display, as if expecting it to speak again, as if expecting the universe to change its mind. But it did not. The fleets remained distant now, no longer pressing against her command, no longer demanding, just present, watching. And that was a different kind of tension, one she understood less because it did not come with orders or threats. It came with expectation, and that was harder to carry. She exhaled slowly, a breath she had not realized she was holding, then turned, not sharply, not with command, but with intention, and found Ethan already moving, not toward the exit, not toward the observation deck, but back to the counter, back to the quiet space of the galley where everything had started. He picked up the cloth again, folded it once more, placed it exactly where it had been before, like nothing had changed, like everything had changed. Call watched him for a moment, the simplicity of the motion standing in stark contrast to the scale of what had just happened. "They will keep watching," she said. Not as a warning, not as doubt, just a statement of fact. Ethan nodded slightly, reaching for the ladle again, his movement steady, unhurried. "I know," he replied, and there was no resistance in it, no discomfort, only acceptance, because this was not new to him. This was simply a different form of the same weight he had carried before. Kira stepped closer, her boots quiet against the metal floor, the red emergency lights fading back to standard illumination as systems returned to normal. If anything about this moment could be called normal. "Does it bother you?" she asked, and the question was not tactical, not strategic, it was personal. Ethan paused for a brief second, the ladle hovering above the pot, steam rising around it in soft spirals. "It used to," he said, his voice low, reflective. "When I thought I had to prove something, he set the ladle down gently, turning the heat back on just enough to bring the simmer back. Controlled, precise. Now I just have to choose." Kira studied him. The simplicity of that answer settling deeper than anything. The fleets had said, because it removed the need for validation, for justification, it reduced everything to a single act repeated over time. Choice. She leaned lightly against the counter. Not as a general, not as a commander, but as someone sharing space. "And if one day you do not," she asked quietly, not challenging, not doubting, just acknowledging the possibility that no one else wanted to speak. Ethan did not answer immediately, his eyes on the pot, on the small controlled movement of liquid and heat. On the balance he maintained with minimal effort, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried something new. "Not weight, not distance, but presence. Then you will be there," he said. "Simple, certain." And the words were not a burden placed on her. They were trust returned. Kira did not look away, did not respond with command or correction. She simply nodded once because that was enough. Outside, 3 Galaxies remained at a distance, watching, measuring, waiting. But inside the galley, the air felt different, not because the threat was gone, but because it had been understood, reshaped, given context that no fleet could impose. Ethan stirred the pot slowly, the sound soft, steady, grounding, and for a moment the entire universe felt smaller than that space, smaller than that decision, smaller than the quiet act of continuing. He did not raise his voice, did not look at her, did not need to. When he spoke again, it was almost a whisper, but it carried farther than anything before. I am not trying to be better than what I was, he said. I am just trying to be someone who does not have to choose that again. And Kaler stood there beside him, not above him, not behind him, but with him and beyond the hull, beyond the fleets.